Hello to all our followers and welcome to this new episode of 5 Minutes. Today we will talk about driving prosperity, understanding tax collection in developing economies with our guest Dr. Antonio Savoia, a reader in development economics at the Global Development Institute of the University of Manchester and senior non-resident fellow of the United Nations University World Institute for Development Economic Research. Antonio, it's a great pleasure to have you here at 5 Minutes. Antonio, you have recently conducted a research for the United Nations University on fiscal capacity in developing economies. So my first question is, what do we mean when we talk about fiscal capacity?
Now, coming to your question, fiscal capacity, what is it? Why do we use this term? Essentially, it's taxation. We are trying to understand why certain states are able to raise revenues from taxations and others are not. So what we really mean when we say fiscal capacity is the extent to which states can finance their activities through taxation. In development research, this is quite important, and actually now the ability to raise revenues from taxation is also part of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's important because one of the aspects of development and underdevelopment is how much developing economies, how much they can finance themselves through taxation. And the aggregate broad figures on these tell us that on average a developing economy collects about half of the share of revenues from taxation compared to an advanced economy, the average advanced economy that we see in Western Europe and North America.
Thank you very much. So you already mentioned a little bit, but how important is a good tax system for helping developing economies to grow?
I should have said this earlier. That's a very good question. You say, well, why do we want states to learn to tax? Essentially, the argument on this is that taxation will provide, and is in some respects already providing, the resources to supply a series of public goods and services where we think there is a consensus that says these are important for human development. Think of health and education. Health, education, together with income, make what we call human development. The three ingredients, essentially, that make us more prosperous. But then health and education see often the involvement of state actors. It's the public sector that provides them to a large extent. And for this, you need taxes. Taxation is what has driven historically, the rise of taxation has driven historically the supply of these public goods and services in Western developed economies. And we hope this will repeat itself in a less developing country context. Again, to give you an idea of what we observe in terms of figures on this, is that if you look at variables capturing the extent of public expenditure on health and education, you see that on average, advanced economies are not only those that tax more, as I was saying before, but are also those that spend more on health and education. So that there is also, it's in the empirical facts, this link between taxation and the provision of important public goods and services that support human development.
Thank you. So to link to this question then, can a developing economy improve tax collection by simply adopting a successful Western tax system?
The short answer is no. We don't think, on the basis of what we know now, the current consensus in research, that by simply trying to replicate or mimic what we have seen historically in Western developed economies, developing countries will learn to tax, so will achieve fiscal development. So what is it there then is different in a less developed economy context and that we have to understand in order to develop taxation. The research we have at the moment suggests that it's partly history. History casts a long shadow, and that historical conditions specific to less developed economies may have affected the rise of fiscal states, of taxation. Partly it's institutional factors, and partly is also political conditions that may or may not be present in a less developed economy context.
And connected to these last questions, then it would be, what lessons can policymakers learn to raise tax collection in developing economies then?
When you are thinking on policy, you have to keep it in mind that while developing a tax system, at the same time, a less developed economy needs to use other forms of revenues that perhaps we don't consider as sophisticated as, say, income tax, VAT, but they need to be there. And this includes all sort of ways to finance state activity in less developed economies, like revenues from natural resources or aid and development assistance. That goes is there, will be there, while at the same time we develop tax systems. So in this sense, I would say be patient, stay the course. Rome isn't built in a day, but eventually will be built, is built. Still, based on the research we have done, I would say we also observed something that has policy implications, because we observed that taxation has a higher likelihood to develop if other institutions exist at the same time as are complementary. For example, you need, as you develop a tax system, also the statistical capacity to collect information in your economy. And that is something that often is lacking. So if you try to improve the performance of the revenue administration, but at the same time, you are in a context where you don't have the statistical capacity to collect information on the territory, you are less likely to succeed. Similarly, I would argue you need at the same time well-developed property rights institutions in order to develop taxation. If you want to tax land, but you're not quite sure about who owns what, because the land tenure system presents major drawbacks, then you are in a weaker position. So I don't know, how this is interesting what you are raising here, because I don't know how much policymakers will like this kind of messages. Probably, they were well received, I have to say, but it's not something that is actionable tomorrow, next year. It still tells you something to be aware of, but probably always keeping in mind that this is a long-term process.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Antonio, for this inspiring discussion, and we wish you all the best, and we hope to see you here again at 5 minutes.
Thank you, Luca. See you soon.